The Cape Town Future Energy Festival brings you Future Energy Conversations. This series of conversations brings together thought leaders to discuss the really hard questions around sustainability, our energy future, and what it means to be carbon neutral by 2050.
Welcome to the second edition of a series of future energy conversations with thought leaders in the sector as part of the City of Cape Town's Future Energy Festival. My name is Reshmi Wolvers. I'm with GreenCape, a sector development agency that aims to remove the barriers to the growth of the green economy. My job at GreenCape is driving projects related to alternative service delivery in underserved communities. But today we are here with a young powerhouse in the industry, the director and founder of Adapt, Lauren Hermanus. Lauren, it's nice to see you again.
It's lovely to see you in person again, yes.
Lauren, you've started your own consulting practice. Could you tell us a little bit more about Adapt?
Yes, so as you mentioned, it's called Adapt, and it's a sustainable development research and advisory practice. And what I do is I work in various configurations with different kinds of actors across the public and private sector and with other consultants and with NGOs to really dig into complex societal problems. And I guess see what we can do to respond to them.
Okay, so you make a practice of jumping into the deep end of most problems
I
in this
do,
space.
and I've increasingly had to take responsibility for that choice, but yeah, here I am.
Well, you're the best person for the job as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
I saw that you were recently listed as one of the Mail and Guardian's powerful women in South Africa. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That is amazing. I think there are two things that I want to know. One, what is your secret sauce? And two, how or why on earth did you decide to become entangled in the South Africa's energy system?
Yeah, okay. So, number one, it's really wonderful to get these kinds of encouraging rewards, but when one is sort of given one can think of so many people who should be there in your place. Yeah. So I would say that the secret sauce is probably being surrounded by people who see a lot of value in me, and I can only be grateful for that. And to the second part of your question of why on earth I'm involved in the energy sector, well, it's a long series of unintended events that brought me there. Which began really with working broadly in the field of sustainable development. Really, energy is somewhere where so many issues of equity and environmental constraints and social constraints really come together. And so I was, I guess, pulled into that Gordian knot. And then also, totally accidentally, worked a lot on issues of state capture and state capture in the energy sector as well. And now I'm, I guess, stuck here for better or worse.
It's a bit of a black hole.
Exactly. But very fortunately stuck with a lot of people who I think have an incredible social conscience and who also think about the world in very interesting ways. And so I am lucky to be working on issues that are both ethically compelling and intellectually very, very interesting, although sometimes a little bit depressing.
Well, we won't focus on the depressing. I think we'll focus more on the challenging and innovative side of things. And I think that's something, having followed your career for a while, I'm a little bit of a fangirl, sorry. Having followed that, one of the themes that has come up is that of innovation in the sustainable energy context. So maybe just before we continue, maybe you could define for us your opinion of what that innovation means within the South African energy context.
Yeah. So I think generally, for me, innovation, and this is drawing on so many different conversations, and so I can't really take credit for it, but it's the application of a new idea in service of meaningful change, and so meaningful positive change. There's a lot of not so good change that happens all the time as well. But really, it has to be meaningful to someone. It needs to make a difference in someone's life, improve people's lives and livelihoods in concrete and measurable ways. Yeah. Yeah, so that's how I think about it, and I think that that's a broad enough definition to really bring people from different disciplines and from different parts of the system together into the same conversation.
Thank you. And in the context of the green economy, we're seeing the sectors adapt and change so much on the backs of a myriad of market changes.
Yeah.
And I think SMEs or small and medium-sized enterprises have to build in a level of flexibility into everything that they do. And so these programs that look at the incubation or acceleration or development of it, whatever you want to call it, of SMEs, they need to perhaps showcase a perspective that's more holistic. So typically in this space, you'll find your serial entrepreneur, young white guy from Joburg, die-hard kind of types. How do you encourage that difference when seeding innovation to deal with the South Africa's complex and complicated challenges?
Yeah, I mean, so I would like to sort of preface this by saying I think the journey of entrepreneurship is extremely difficult, and I think we cannot overstate that, really. And one has to be really clear about which problems can be solved by encouraging individual entrepreneurs to take different pathways, to try different strategies, and which issues are systemic. And I think that what you're pointing towards is the capacity to fail, right? So if you have got a lot of security in your network, people who can bolster you when your individual initiatives, projects, ideas, businesses take a hit, then I think you're more likely to go on this journey of entrepreneurship. And I think that if we are to encourage a whole range of people who are perhaps much more precarious in the way that they're positioned in the world to undertake this journey, then we have to look at some of the systemic ways in which their risk management can be managed more systemically and in a broader way. Yeah.
So, say we're able to figure out how to grow this SME market, and we now have a range of entrepreneurs that are successful in this space. I think one of the challenges they'll still have to face is secure access to electricity supply.
Oh, yes.
And I know you've done a lot of work to try to help us to adapt to South Africa's energy crisis and really how to face Eskom's debt spiral.
Yeah.
I know in this last week, at least, we've received some good news from Eskom, and I don't know how to respond to that personally.
But maybe don't get too excited yet.
Yeah. But what has driven you to keep going into this black hole, if I can put it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's something about being in a highly pressurized situation that does encourage some big ideas. And I think that the crisis that South Africa is currently facing in terms of our energy security, reliability and flexibility is perhaps an opportunity for us to rethink issues around decentralization, bottom-up organization, and power in the people, political, social sense, and not so much just only to do with electricity generation. I think now is the moment for that kind of rethinking. And I think it is starting to happen for sure. Yeah. And certainly the city of Cape Town has been leading the way in many ways. But actually, there are lots of municipalities who are thinking very differently about how they might position themselves now in such a way as to enable robust and resilient service delivery for their residents.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think exactly as you said, as we move away from kilowatt hours, from electricity alone, there's the whole new concept of the just energy transition, which has made a lot of noise as we move towards more renewables in the system.
Yeah.
And this speaks to the co-benefits around the energy system, the local economic and social development that can happen around these big projects.
Yeah.
before we dive into that, what is your definition of the just energy transition?
Well, okay. So we're already speaking about this energy transition, which is obviously part of a broader transition to a lower carbon economy, or lower carbon economies, actually, because we're not coherently part of the same system. So we manage things differently at different scales. So obviously, you've already mentioned it's about a largest share of renewables in our system. But the just part of this equation is about managing the vulnerabilities created in the process of transition.
Right.
A lot of that discussion has been around job retention and protecting workers.
Yeah.
But in South Africa, we have to be really careful about focusing only on people who are employed, because we also have people who are systematically unemployed and, at the moment at least, not employable. Right. So I don't mean to say that that's anything about them that makes them unemployable, but actually that our economy is unable to absorb them.
No, I mean, if I can just stop you there for a second, I mean, just to add to that, if we just look at the jobs around the mining industry in Mpumalanga and so on, those jobs aren't sustainable as it is, because one, the health conditions of those workers is questionable, and their ability to continue working because of the river systems and everything that's been affected by coal, as an example, is also problematic. So we can't rely on, I mean, we can't only focus on the existing jobs, but what about the new jobs in this space?
Exactly, the existing jobs, the new jobs, but also whether people are employed or not, what is the level of access to basic services that we think everybody should have regardless of their job status. Yeah. So I think that's a really important part of the just transition conversation that is not always as far forward. And one understands this, right? Because we sit with this unemployment problem in South Africa and no one knows how to crack that nut. And so, of course, our impulse is to look at what jobs can we retain so that we can at least, I guess, like tread water before we swim forward, right? So absolutely, that's been part of the process. I mean, another aspect around this issue of justice is thinking about the process, how we make decisions or how decisions are formulated and then implemented in the energy sector.
Right.
We come from, we have a legacy in South Africa in the sector of low transparency, issues of corruption that really are about the way that the sector has been managed from its colonial through to its apartheid past and into the present. So we have to think, again, in this current context where we're faced with these constraints and these challenges, what is the opportunity for rethinking broadly participation, collective decision-making, and participatory forms of governance?
Right, and that collective decision-making is something that interests me. At GreenCape, we have an alternate service delivery unit, which works with communities to co-design solutions for their challenges. Yeah. And it's by no means an easy task. And of course,
participation is not easy.
No, but how do you encourage that? What is the benefit of that to a large-scale energy project developer, for example? What is the benefit to them to actually include communities in the design of their social responsibilities?
Well, it has to do a little bit with the way we think societies function. And so there's a top-down model of policy making that assumes that if you take a decision in a complex social system and you announce that decision, then all the little bits and pieces within that system will register that information and adjust accordingly. Yeah. And this is not how the world works. And so you can ignore the fact that the system self-organizes at different scales, but you will do that at your peril. Either you will be ignored entirely, or you will set up a situation where you just don't have any coherence across different scales, and that will, in the end, lead to a whole bunch of unintended consequences that actually might have significant costs for the system in general. Yeah, and for individuals, obviously, within that system.
Right. Yeah. So I know that there's we've just wrapped our head around the concept of this just energy transition, but I know that there is a a new theme that has captured your imagination,
Yes.
and that has to do with urban resilience, and particularly just urban transitions.
Yes, so it's another big mouthful, I know, but I think something that is incredibly important to just keep in mind when we talk about the energy system in South Africa is that people, ordinary people like you and I, and businesses, small businesses, large businesses, their primary interface with the state, with government, is at a local government scale, so subnational scale, and for most of us, that's in the context of cities.
Right.
And so, whatever decisions are taken and implemented at a national level, land at that scale.
Right.
And because all of our cities are unique, have very particular characteristics, different challenges that they face, different opportunities as well, how single decisions land is variable across these different regions. And so really it's very important that whatever national policy is formulated, is really bedded down at a local context. So you have perhaps a just transition at a national level.
Right.
You have multiple urban transitions that are happening in parallel.
Right.
And the challenge really is to make sure that those transitions are just and equitable within the boundaries of particular areas, but also between regions, because we do know that there's been unequal development and unequal development opportunities across different areas in South Africa.
Right. So we know we can't ignore cities. In fact, at
You could try.
at our own peril. In fact, cities, at least in this context of South Africa, are leading the charge for climate action.
Yeah.
So how do you see our existing cities, how do you see their systems progressing in this regard?
So I think that an important motivator that is pushing cities to take climate change very seriously is the fact that climate-related risk shows up for them in a very real way. And it shows up for them in the vulnerability of the people who live within their borders, within their jurisdiction. It shows up in ways that their infrastructure is vulnerable to climate change risk. So it shows up in these very concrete ways, and it also shows up in their balance sheets. And so really, I think that it's probably some innovative thinking around risk, because risk is also, it's a concept that translates across financial systems and into social systems and into a lot of different spaces. So individuals have a concept of risk that they can work with. People who work in governance have a concept of risk, and these speak, I think, pretty well to one another. So I think that there's an opportunity for probably some work that is framed around risk management as cities navigate this unprecedented experience of our local climates. And I think that it's an important leverage point, but I think it opens up a whole bunch of interesting conversations around innovative finance, innovative infrastructural solutions, but also, not just products, it's also about innovative behaviors. So when we say the application of a new idea for innovation, we don't just mean something you can hold in your hand.
Right.
It's also your relationship to maybe old things as well that can also change and also be a source of innovation.
Awesome. I'm a bit stuck on what to continue with there, but maybe just to say, when we're including cities or when we are trying to figure out how they can respond to this risk and this vulnerability that they face, particularly in this global, pandemic context that we're facing with now and their next move. How do we do so in a way that includes their funding mechanisms? Because money doesn't fall out of the sky to perhaps to finance service delivery, for example. So how do we fund this transition?
Well, I don't have a complete. I think if I did have a complete answer to that question, I wouldn't be here.
with us today.
I'd just be flogging it, selling it to people. So But, I think it's really important that those of us who work on different aspects of questions around urban resilience or urban development become financially literate and are really able to work more in partnership with people who engage around issues of the urban fiscus, so of the fiscal city as an entity. And I think that, absolutely, to kind of only work in the realm of ideals without taking very seriously the resource constraints that cities face, it's kind of irresponsible, actually. And so I think it is a little bit intimidating, and I get why people find it, public finance is complicated or complex. So I do understand why people sort of shy away from that. But I think that increasingly, just observing very interesting conversations, and I was in a webinar the other day that is an example of this, where people from different disciplines and who looked at sort of infrastructural questions or questions around, access to different services or are engaging with fiscal issues and fiscal challenges in new ways. I don't think there are easy answers to this question. I think there are many, many trade-offs to be made. And I think that the downside to some of those trade-offs is very serious, and it's going to require, I think, a level of trust between people working on those issues, but also, I think, between decision makers and their constituencies. And a situation like the one that we're in now, where people are extremely vulnerable, is perhaps not an easy one in which to build the trust that is necessary to navigate this transition together. And so I think that's probably one of the big challenges. So we started talking about finance, and now I'm talking about trust, but I think they go together.
They're certainly not unrelated. And I think that's key. It's that, while we're building this trust and while we're working towards a common solution, perhaps we should consider working together on this, on the solution and not working in silos. So I completely agree with you on that. Okay, so this is a little bit moving away from that, but this should be interesting to hear your answer. But there are plenty to choose from, but if you had to, which industry challenge keeps you up at night?
Oh, well, I try not to be kept up at night because sleep is very important.
Okay.
But I think there's several, but increasingly I am drawn to the challenge of how the issues that I want to work on do interact with our fiscal constraints. And again, I think much like working in energy at all, it's a reluctance admission to think that I want to work on issues related to finance. But whatever we do, whatever we'd like to do to meaningfully change people's lives in a positive direction will, as you say, need to be resourced in some way. And I do think that, this is now something that we're all having to take seriously in a different way than before. And I think that COVID has really emphasized this because obviously when we think about financial issues, we also have to think about them over the short, medium, and longer term. And in a time of crisis, we all become really short term in our thinking. But climate change is a long-term problem. And similarly, when we think about sort of energy transformations or energy transitions, these are long-term structural shifts. It's not just about taking decisions now or developing policies that have maybe a 1, 2, 3 year lifespan. You're planning in decades. And so how to think about those timescales and the urgency of people's needs now, while also trying to think about, how we're going to navigate or even steer this transition, I think,
So get out of this crisis and deal with the greater crisis of climate change.
Well, exactly. And neither of them is going to go away. And so it's kind of an impossible task. Again,
Yeah.
it's this issue of like, it's going to involve trade-offs.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be nice trade-offs. They're not easy trade-offs. And so I think regardless of what your job is at the moment, and whether you work in the public or private sector, if you're working in the energy space, you're working in the realm of ethics. Like, you're working with competing notions of the good, and you're working with people who view those competing notions very, very differently and have either vested interests, but also like are deeply personally affected and made vulnerable by different decisions that are taken. And so I guess you have to have a strong stomach, you know, if you want to keep working in this space.
Yeah, and find out who the PR person is for coronavirus and try and adapt that to the climate change.
Yeah, totally.
So last question from my side, and this is really just for my own personal benefit,
Yes.
but what is the most important thing you've learned in your career so far?
I think there are two related things that I've learned. So the first thing is that you need to think about, or I've had to think about, what is my work? So not what my job is, how that transforms from day to day or from year to year, but really what are the questions that keep me motivated, that keep me intrigued, keep my mind engaged. And I think that, I've started realizing that I've been circling a few issues, and that feels pretty good to have some definition in terms of that practice. The second thing, which is related, is really to value the relationships that you build through your practice, and to not take for granted that you understand the significance of a relationship right when it's formed, or even as it's progressing. And, you know, I've found that I've collaborated 10 years down the line with someone that I struck up a conversation with at a conference somewhere on something I wasn't even that interested in. So I do think those relationships are a really important source of feedback on how you're doing and how you're thinking about things. They can connect you to important resources, but also they bring joy into your practice. And I think we could all do with a little bit more joy.
Well, that's a great way to end. Thank you so much, Lauren. I think we've all learned so much from you, myself included. Really appreciate the valuable insights you've brought to us today.
Well, it's always lovely to see you, and it's especially lovely to see you after such a long time.
Thank you.